Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be discussing 5 bold predictions for the Sharks for the upcoming 2021 season. Now, these predictions may range from more on the mild side to more bold, but starting off, we have Erik Karlsson will end up with more points than Brent Burns. This was not something that has happened in the past couple of years, basically because Erik Karlsson has been injured for the past couple of years, but he says now that for the first time since joining the Sharks, he will be 100% healthy. Now, Brent Burns, he had the 82 points a couple years ago, but this past season it was not necessarily as successful as that, and he continues to get older, now will be 35 and even 36 for parts of this season. Erik Karlsson, not super young himself, but still just about 30 years old, meaning I can definitely see Erik Karlsson actually putting up more points than Brent Burns. It likely won't be by a large margin, but I do think Karlsson has what it takes as long as he does actually remain 100% healthy. The second prediction, also somewhat relating to Karlsson, that the Vlasic-Karlsson pairing will end up being one of the best pairings in the league come next season. We already know that both of these players have the potential to be near the tops of their game in their areas. Erik Karlsson just has the potential to be the best defenseman in the NHL. He had this title just 2-3 years ago. Marc-Edouard Vlasic has the potential to be one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL. He had this title about 3 or 4 years ago. And so while yes, both of these players have aged and so have lost that title to other players like Hedman in Karlsson's case or others in Vlasic's case, both of these players do have the potential to actually go back to that level. And if Karlsson can actually sort of bring up his game, and with him being fully healthy, that is definitely a possibility. I do think that this pairing, if they are put together, which they should be, does have the potential to be one of the best in the NHL. The players should complement themselves very well, complement their play styles very, very well, and I'm pretty excited to see whether or not this pairing can actually click. When Karlsson was originally traded to the Sharks just 2 years ago, I was really excited for that pairing, and I haven't really gotten to see it pan out all that much in these past couple of seasons, so hopefully season 3 will be the one where it takes off. The third prediction, Jones and Dubnyk will start a very similar amount of games coming this next season. So right now the NHL is looking at around a 60-game season. So while I don't think both of these goaltenders will have 30 and 30, I'd be surprised if one of the goaltenders actually started more than, let's say, 35 games come next season. I suspect that both will remain at a pretty similar level to each other, and so the coach, Bob Booner, for the Sharks will just decide to play them in a sort of 1A, 1B situation. Now, this isn't to say that both goaltenders will just be so bad that neither will win out, and this is definitely not to say that both goaltenders will be so good that neither would win out. I just suspect that neither will really break away from the other, and it'll just end up being the case where the Sharks just play and manage to rest one of the two goaltenders. So while I do still think if the Sharks were to make the playoffs this coming season that it'll probably end up being Jones being the starter just because of his playoff pedigree that he has with the Sharks, I don't think he'll necessarily play that many more games than Dubnyk, and if he does play more games, it'll probably only be by 2 or 3. The fourth prediction, Donato will be a 20-goal scorer come next season. The reason I have 20-goal scorer in quotation marks is mostly because since this coming season will be a 60-game season, it won't necessarily be the 20-goal scorer that we are used to, which is over an 82-game season. So a 20-goal scorer in a 60-game season or in an 82-game season is basically a 15-goal scorer in a 60-game season, and that's around in line where I would expect Donato to be, around a 15-goal scorer and maybe 30-35 points over the full 60 games. Obviously, the Sharks, for the second straight year, are entering the season with an empty spot in their top 6. They've got Kane, Couture, Hertl, and Meyer, with LeBanc sort of hanging on there in the top 6, but the empty spot is quite apparent, and last season they could not find any player to fill that. They tried out multiple. Coming into this season, it's looking like it'll end up being similar, but they did pick up at the very least Ryan Donato, who does have the possibility of being, a fringe top 6 player, and I suspect that's why they ended up picking him up. And so come game 1 of the season, I would be very surprised if Donato did not find himself on that second line unless something worked magnificently in the preseason if that is to actually happen. So I suspect that Donato, while he will not necessarily be able to keep up with the players on his line, I don't think he's going to all of a sudden blow up and be a super effective scorer. I do think he will be good enough to maintain a spot on that line for the majority of the season and will be able to put up, as I said, the 30 or so points that I suspect. And finally, the last bold prediction, and maybe one of the more far out there ones, though we'll see, is that Ryan Merkley will play at least a couple of games here for the Sharks in this upcoming season. Right now, as the Sharks are coming in with an empty spot in their top 6 forwards, they're coming in with an empty spot in their top 6 defense. They have, obviously, Burns and Shemek, Vlasic, Carlson, and then Ferraro, but for their 6th defenseman, they have yet to really sign any veteran guy to fill that hole, and there's no Tim Heed anymore to fill that hole. And so at the moment, it's sort of being flimsily held by Jacob Middleton, who has, in the very few NHL games he has played, not been impressive at all. And so depending on how performances go in training camp and potentially in whatever preseason that the teams are given, Ryan Merkley could absolutely have a shot at getting into the final spot for at least a couple of games. Do I think he'll be a consistent guy who plays 60 games this coming season? Of course not. It's, an outside shot, but very, very unlikely. But I do think Merkley will be given an opportunity. The Sharks are not necessarily a super contending team this coming season, so I don't think they should be afraid of taking, a slightly worse roster for a couple of games. And I think Merkley would do him some good to get some NHL experience, at least as far as fans are concerned. It's pretty clear that Ryan Merkley is the most skilled prospect in the Sharks system and is certainly the best hope for the Sharks in their system. And so while there's technically something that the Sharks organization themselves know more than us, in that maybe Merkley, it hasn't really panned out all that well in these past couple of seasons, from my perspective, I feel as though Merkley is sort of this shining beacon of hope in what is an otherwise relatively bleak prospect pool that the Sharks currently have and are looking to build up over the next couple of years. And so seeing Merkley actually play some games and get some NHL experience coming next season would be good, and I think may indeed actually happen, even though his AHL season this past year hasn't been all that great. And while the possibility exists that, transferring between NHL and AHL rosters will be somewhat difficult thanks to the circumstances the teams will be playing under due to the coronavirus, the fact that the Sharks share a city and share a rink between their NHL and AHL teams, San Jose Sharks and San Jose Barracuda, should make transfers much, much easier for them, which is why I also think he could definitely be given the opportunity. But that will do it for these predictions. As I said, some ranging more mild side, which is, you could say the Carlson over Burns in terms of points isn't necessarily super bold, but definitely some on the more bold side with that final prediction of Merkley getting a couple of games. Class dismissed.